I've got my little presentation here. Now, when I say unite your Spark, I'm talking philosophically as well as quite literally. The Spark suite of tools has several different arms. Imagine it's like a little digital octopus, except it's only got 3 tentacles. And those tentacles are post, page, and video. Now, each of them share similar characteristics, but for different kinds of functions, there is some overlap, but there's also some big differences as to what you can do and how you can do it. So I'm going to run you through the basics of how to create something simple and small in each of parts of the suite, as well as some very, very useful affiliated resources, nominally Pixabay, Unsplash, and Creative Cloud. I'm going to briefly go through what each of those is and how you might be able to use it, not just in Adobe Spark, but also with your other resources. Because as educators, more and more in this digital age, we have to be very careful about what we pull off of the internet and what we use, because even though it's not an intentional decision on our part, it is very easy nowadays to accidentally violate copyright and use somebody else's resources without permission. So it's really important for you to know, learn, and share with your colleagues what is appropriate to use and what isn't appropriate to use, as well as some of the language you have to keep an eye out for when you're using resources that you pull off the internet. Okay, so I guess the first thing I wanted to start with was in the background of your mind while I'm talking, I'd like you to consider a theme that you plan on having for your suite of assets, whether or not you share them with me or share them with the group or just with me personally, up to you. But a theme can be something as simple as a keyword like unify, create, technology, innovation, inspiration. It could be something more specific, like a particular piece of information, like you want to create a little welcome page to new students in a unit, or for a particular subject area. Or it could be something to do with our theme for the Adobe Education Summit this year, which is what COVID-19 has done for my teaching. So if you have a theme in mind, it really helps you start to craft the visuals of what you're going to look for when you're creating assets. I'll use that word a lot. So an asset can be a video, it can be a page, it can be an image, it can be a standalone picture that you add to one of those 3 things. But assets, in order for you to find them online, you need to have a bit of an idea of what you're looking for, because when it comes to resources, generally speaking, people who create things and push things up online for others to use, add them with a series of keywords so people can search for something that they're interested in, like light bulb, and they'll add those tags so that you will get a million photos of light bulbs. But they might add something more abstract like illuminate or inspiration to the same picture. So you'll start to have a little bit of a library appear with things that might be not literally what you're looking for, but relevant in a conceptual way to what you're looking for. So I also want you to think about what's compelling to you as a learner or viewer of content. So I also want you to think about, when you're building assets, why it's compelling to you and why other people might want to engage with it, might be compelling. Obviously, we hear the term death by PowerPoint a lot, notwithstanding the fact that I've technically got a slide up on the screen right now to give you something to look at while I speak. But if someone is going to engage with something, you want to think about who your audience is, why they'd want to review your assets to completion. That's particularly relevant when you're making like short videos, small web pages, to the point posts. You want people to want to take the time to cast their eye around and view all of your good work. So I've talked about the Adobe Spark suite. Since we've got some people who've nominated that they are starting at the absolute beginning, I will actually drop the link to Spark into the chat now. And if you haven't already, I'd like you to navigate to that page. Now, I'm already signed in, But what I hope you have already through your organization is attached to your work identity or your work email. Your school or institution should give you access to the Adobe Spark suite. If you don't already have something available through your email, and I'll just open an incognito tab to show you what that screen will look like. When you go to sign in at the top right-hand corner of the screen, you'll be given a few different options. Now, what I do at the moment is because I have an Adobe ID that's tied to my TAFE Queensland email address, but some of you might have a Adobe Spark account tied to your work email, particularly those of you who work for the Department of Education. So you might have to log in with a school account. So I'll demonstrate how I log in by clicking on the login with Adobe ID, but the steps are relatively uniform depending on which way you click. So for me, if I go in and try to log in with my Adobe ID and I type in my work email like that, and I hit continue, I personally actually get taken to the sign-on page for my organization, which is TAFE Queensland, and I enter in my work username and email address into that field, and then it'll kick me through to this screen. Whereas some of you may have a bit of a different experience. If you go to that Adobe Spark page, you may select sign in and then select login with school account and try entering your email address in there. If you don't have any success with it, you can create a personal account for free, and everything that I show you how to do today can be done with a personal account. So say, for instance, if you want to use this with students, but your school does not happen to have a school license set up for your students and they are above the minimum age requirement, they can go in and make their own ID. So particularly if you're dealing with the adult learners, they don't have to be tied into your organization. We just have to be a bit more careful when we're dealing with minors when they're publishing things on the internet, obviously, but I won't be getting into that today. This is more focused at things that you can create for yourself. So I'll just get a quick show. Again, wiggle your cursor over the screen if you're only on one monitor, and select the participants toolbar to get a reaction, or type yes or no into the chat. But can everybody here today log into Spark? Open your mic too, it's fine. I've got a couple of yeses. Fantastic. Do I have any no's? Yes on iPad, fantastic, Danielle. Because the good thing about doing things in Spark is that regardless of what device you start off on, you can actually then start it on a mobile device and then log in on a computer, a desktop device, whether it's a laptop, PC or Mac, and continue working on the same assets. You don't have to stick files on a USB stick and then try to find adapters to pull things across from mobile devices. It's all based in the cloud, which is just lovely. So once you're in, if you're on a mobile device, you might see something that's a little bit similar to this if you go into Spark Post. Whereas if you're on the Spark homepage on a desktop device, you'll see some variant of this big landing page. Now, just to be a little bit more confusing, all three Spark apps exist in one place on the on the web version, but they're three separate apps on a mobile device. Whoa, that was interesting. So for those of you that are on the desktop version, I would encourage you to open the screen up and view the different options that you have going across the screen here. We've got Instagram stories that if we hover over it, it says graphic. Instagram post, which is a square format, it says graphic again, so that it creates it in post. Facebook post, again, it's in Adobe Post. Photo collage, it's all about graphics, so it's post. Presentation, which technically creates a web page, which is Spark page. Slideshow, which actually creates a video. And then we've got branded, which again goes into post. Most of these pre-done buttons go into Adobe Spark Post, but some of them go into either Spark Page or Spark Video. So when I'm working on a project, generally speaking, because I create like visual diaries of sessions that I attend live during the session, so I will generally do them in a web browser, but I have multiple windows open at the same time, so that makes it much easier for me to do that. My idea of how I get started is exhibited in this image of some of the options that you'll see when you first open an Adobe Spark page. I often use this example as a little reminder to sort of say, okay, you have literally 1,000 different options that you can choose as to how you're going to approach it. The best way to start any project, especially on software that you're not familiar with, is to pick a thing and move along with the thing. Because if you try to choose too many things or flip backwards, you'll start to get bogged down. So what we're going to do first is we're going to look at some of the assets that you can use so you can get a bit of an idea for how you'd like to use them. We're going to show you some keywords so that you can start putting that theme that I asked you about earlier onto paper, so to speak. And then after that, we're going to talk about how you could potentially organize your chosen assets and then add them into your project. So, as I mentioned before, we've got the different suites of Spark with a couple of different menus for all different kinds of thinkers as to how you might approach them. You'll also see here, there's some projects that I've previously created, but if you're brand new to Spark, these will be blank, but that's absolutely fine. It's just because I have stuff that I've already played with before. What you will also see is some templates, and if you want to start off with a template, that is absolutely fine. There are no rules for this workshop. I just want you to walk away with 3 different assets from each of the 3 parts of the Spark suite. So when I talk about assets, as I mentioned before, assets can also include the items or files that go into creating visually stunning projects. So the first one that I mentioned before is Unsplash and Pixabay. So Unsplash and Pixabay, oh, I'm sorry to hear that you can't get in, Lydia. We can talk about that after the session if you like. Do a bit of screen share and some problem solving. So there's 2 main websites that I'm going to show you through today. Now, I haven't just chosen these at random. Unsplash and Pixabay are actually websites that are community driven. So creatives add their own personal work to this free so that they can also access free libraries of other people's work. And they use a copyright rule called CCO, so it's Creative Commons. So I've also uploaded things to Unsplash, and basically I understand that any of the pictures that I put up there are put up there explicitly for other people to download and use as they see fit in whatever context they like. So obviously contributors should be a little bit careful as to whether or not they're putting up private information in any of this photography. So you can see, I'd like to think that that image is actually not particularly a personal photo, but it might be a staged stock photo, particularly for use underneath the keywords and tags that they've attached to it. Unsplash specifically is naturalistic photography. So this is just the plain landing page. And if I scroll down, you'll see there's a heck of a lot of assets, but they're all fairly natural. Some of them are, you know, buildings, themes, clothing, people, but they're all very natural looking photographs. That is in contrast with Pixabay, because while Unsplash is all just naturalistic photography, even if some of it's black and white or a little bit stylized, if you jump across into Pixabay, not only does it have free images, It also has other kinds of assets that you might find really helpful. They have photos, they have vector graphics, they have illustrations, and they have videos that are available for you to access and download. So even though right here, it may have very similar looking photos to Unsplash, if I select the drop down here and go into videos, and I search the keyword electric and hit enter, you'll actually see there's videos that are 15 seconds long, and some of them are photographs of actual, or sorry, I should say videos of actual scenes, but others have actually been rendered and created by somebody in potentially Adobe software, and then they've actually uploaded this short clip to have as a background. So potentially for those of you who use Zoom, you could download one of these videos and you could use this video for your backdrop to sit behind you in your Zoom meetings, or you could use it to create a really dynamic intro background to an Adobe Spark video, and that is something that I'll be showing you a little bit later. So I'm not going to get too bogged down with this. I'm just going to choose one of these assets at random. That's pretty dynamic. I'm going to select it, and you can see that it's available for a free download with no attribution required. But it's always a good idea when you're downloading assets to keep track of where you've downloaded them from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a little sticky note that I keep on my computer. I'm going to make it yellow. I'm going to pull that across onto my screen. I'm going to copy that detail. And I'm going to copy that URL. Because I'm going to be creating this as I go. So I want to retain that information for later. And you can see that image has now appeared in my downloads. Now, going back over to Unsplash with the more naturalistic photography, there is something that I do want to mention that I think is fairly important for everyone to be thoughtful about. And that is, if you use keywords when you're searching for photography and you're planning on using something that very predominantly features somebody's actual identifiable face, even though the person who's uploaded the photo has clicked a box to say that they have the rights to the photo, the model that they're using doesn't necessarily, it hasn't necessarily given them the rights to put their photo up. So even though the author of the photo says that they own it and they say that they're releasing it for your use or for anybody's use, sometimes people can get themselves into trouble by going on the internet and finding a picture of, say for instance, a smiling child. And that picture of a smiling child, the person who took the photo may have put it up thinking that it was okay, but their parent may not very much appreciate their child all of a sudden being plastered all over a website that they have nothing to do with. So it's worthwhile thinking when you're trying to select photos that are dynamic and interesting, that especially if they're going to be put up somewhere in public, like published online in one of your resources that other people can access, and particularly if they're going to be placed next to a school or a product, that person's identifiable face being put up next to it implies endorsement, and someone may not appreciate that very much. So when you're selecting photos, just have a bit of a think, really, especially when it comes to photos that have someone's identifiable features in it. So here's another photo that I find interesting, so I'm going to download that one as well. And I'm going to make sure I copy the details. And I'm going to stick it on a sticky note. It doesn't matter what you use. You can use sticky notes on your computer if you've got a PC. You can use a Word document that you've opened up in the background. It's just generally a good idea to sort of keep track of what you've grabbed and from where. So now that I've grabbed a couple of assets from each of these websites, which are actually internally linked, by the way, into Spark itself, and I'll show you how in a moment, those files have actually downloaded onto my computer. So if I select Show in Folder, you can see here those downloads are sitting on my computer. So there's my video of a plasma ball. There's my video of some electrical wiring. And there's that picture of a night sky that you saw on my slide when I first started out. So what I probably would like to do, rather than having everything dumped into my downloads folder and getting a bit messy, is I'm going to cut those files out of my downloads folder, and I'm going to use my Adobe Creative Cloud files because I have Adobe Creative Cloud installed on my computer. Now, regardless of whether or not you use Adobe Creative Cloud or you just really like to have everything organized in folders because your downloads folder got a bit crazy, it's always a good idea to have a bit of a filing system in place when you're using assets. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new folder that is called Ignite Spark Assets. And at the beginning of that file name, I'm going to put the date because I am a date girl. I like arranging things by date order. And to do that, I put the date backwards so that they always sit in order. So I've created that folder, and the assets that I've created are going to get dropped in there. I'm going to view them by extra large icons so I can see what each is. So now that I've created that folder and it's named nicely, I'm going to drag and drop that across into my APAC Summit folder. So now my images aren't just arranged by what I'm using them for, they're also arranged by the title of the workshop. So if I think back to myself and I go, oh, there was this really great photo I had, I know that I used it at the Adobe Education Summit in 2020. I know which folder it goes into, and I know based on what I was working on that particular day where that file should be. So it just makes it a lot easier to find things later on. So I'm going to pause myself there, and I'd love everyone to either open up their mics or put in the chat some comments about whether or not they've decided on a theme and what that theme is if they'd like to share. I see Vicky's made a comment to say one of my colleagues was horrified to find a picture of her son in a book. Yeah, it happens way more often than you'd think it does, even nowadays. Even with Google image search, it can get a bit crazy. Okay, so Ben's noted that his has an iStock watermark on it. That's actually my fault. I didn't point out to you that this very, very top row on Pixabay, those are, it's paid promotion. So Pixabay subsidizes its running cost by having sponsored content. I would encourage you to avoid using any stocks that sits at the top of the screen, because in order to remove that watermark, you'd actually have to pay for it. So you might just be able to see here that the sponsored video stock has a little bit of an outline on it. Might show well on your computer. It's very subtle. It's a little bit sneaky. What I would encourage you to do is just scroll down a little bit and choose from one of the unpaid options that are available for you to use. Otherwise, you know, it's just going to have the watermark on it, and that's what it is. So Sharon's got to run off. That's absolutely fine. Thank you, Sharon. So I don't have any comments in the chat. Did anybody want to open up their mics and ask any questions or talk about their theme at this stage? That's okay. I'm not going to leave dead air. I'm just going to continue on. But if you do think of anything that you want to share, please just pop it into the chat or open up your mic. I do not mind this being a little bit more interactive.